Now I'm completely flustered. What I'm trying to do here and presenting on behalf of general Australian land research community, reporting back about some ongoing activity which has been occurring in the land modelling space since about October time, and as part of that, I'd like to thank the other members of the community, of that community, for lots of input through the intervening time. Just to contrast with the Oceans group, the land group in general is a smaller group and it's more disparate. It's spread across multiple activities, and so part of the fun and games in the land space is herding cats. I think it's fair to say. Now, to orient a broader audience, I can't use the mouse. What we're talking about in this access schematic that the NRI have pulled together are these two green boxes. We have to pay attention on the land for a couple of reasons in our access space. Firstly, because a lot of the near-surface climatology, and therefore a lot of the impacts that impact onto our human society, etc., are dependent on the land surface state. So if you get your land surface model wrong, then that feeds back into a whole set of relevant metrics that you feed into your impact statements, impact work, and that gives you can give a good or a bad impression of what your overall model is doing, because people tend to concentrate on things like near surface air temperature, and that's incredibly dependent on what your land surface is doing. The secondly is that the terrestrial biosphere, which is really the focus of today's presentation, is an important component of the global carbon cycle, and hence our interests around net zero and the trajectory of climate change, modification of the natural sequestration rates and things like that. Now, back in October, the land surface modelling group got together and we did a somewhat warts and all sharing of how the ESM had performed in CMIP7, and we had a look at results like this. What this shows is the net accumulation of carbon by the natural biosphere through time from 1850, according to a subset of the CMIP6 participatory models. The grey bar on there is a reanalysis independent estimate. The other models, most of the models are up the top. ACCESS-ESM is not. It's well outside what we would expect. And this is despite the fact that when we have a look at our main fluxes, so gross primary productivity, net respiration, those are actually reasonable. But it's the net accumulation of carbon through time. If you want to do things like use your Earth system model to do things like assessment of policy around national level policy around climate mitigation, using an Earth system model, we have to get this kind of thing at least closer to the ballpark than it is now. Our likely cause, but it's not the only potential cause, is the representation of land use change and the lack of secondary vegetation in our current Earth system model. So during that meeting I was just talking about, as a group, we then considered that result and other results through a number of lenses. So one of those was, what capability do we have now that's been tested and available that could address these issues? And secondly, where are the other participant models in Earth system modeling going in terms of their capability? And one of the key areas that's coming up in the more general land surface modeling and Earth system modeling context is that we're recognizing that to get these longer time scale attributes of the terrestrial biosphere correct, you need to have some information about what the dynamics of the plant cohort are doing, plant communities are doing. Now, one thing that Andy Pittman was very keen on reminding us during those conversations is that the demand from our stakeholders, so that's government, finance, and industry, is actually already outstripping our current capacity in this space. So We have finance industries making decisions, multi-billion-dollar decisions based on these results, and we know that these results are flawed. We're not telling them that those results are flawed, but they probably do know that those results are flawed, but they're still making decisions based on this kind of information. Now, in that sort of wider context, one of our capabilities that we have sitting around in the land surface modeling context is a model called POP. It's a plant demography model. It was developed by CSIRO researcher Vanessa Havard over multiple years, and it actively couples into our existing cable and CASA CMP models in a broadly modular way. And it does simulate the dynamics of the communities of woody plants. And the idea is that having some community, the cohort level information, better allows you to link into the vast knowledge in the ecological space about the biospheric parts of the carbon cycle. So it's things like recruitment, mortality, natural thinning. And because we're able to connect into the ecology space, that allows you to lever off a much broader knowledge base in terms of parameterization and verification. The ultimate aim is that if you think you've got a better process representation, then you probably, or you're hoping that you're getting better multi-annual carbon cycle dynamics and also a better response to forcing such as increased CO2. So therefore you should have better confidence about what your carbon cycle is going to do in the future, and therefore that feeds into questions about net zero, national commitments, etc., etc. POP also includes some representations about the impacts of disturbance. We have a linked fire model, but fire as a process-based model, not as a biophysical model, sort of event-based model, which are things like the Bureau are developing as part of their the national emergency warning work. And we've also got a land use change scheme, which links in the two areas. Importantly for our context here, POP was never ever developed with the aim of being implemented in ACCESS. The obvious question is then, how does that compare, that POP cable with POP compare to the existing? It's actually very rarely happened. And the basic answer is they're different. Against some metrics at this site in the Amazon, the cable on its own was better. Against some other metrics, the fully coupled model, the cable POP model was better. It's also an unfair comparison because there's a certain bit of element of recalibration going on in the two exercises. So it's a bit difficult to do an apples and apples comparison. What is definitely true is that when you run those models under double CO, this was a double plus 200 ppm response. The two cable models are the two green ones, two green bars on the set. They do have completely different responses to increased CO2. So that feeds into our questions about what's happening into the future. The other way we can compare things is by looking at performance relative to like models, and we can do that across a range of carbon metrics. What I'm showing here are results. One's been replotted from the other one, but they're from the same underpinning benchmarking system, which is called ILAM, which is essentially a quasi-automated, internationally developed means of assessing land surface models. ACCESS-ESM is as part of the CMIP7 ensemble on the left-hand side. Blue on that one is your model is doing better than other models. Not your model is doing well against observations, but it's doing better against other models. And we can see that for many of the carbon cycle variables, we're actually doing ESM is actually doing reasonably well compared to the other CMIP models. The big one that it's doing really bad was that thing that we picked up earlier, which is that the accumulation of carbon through time. In contrast, cable POP, when it's been compared against the trendy version 11 ensemble, is doing reasonably well across all of these metrics. Interestingly enough, Pierre Friedenstein did not present the equivalent accumulated land through time. So where does this leave us in terms of implementing cable and BOP? We had a bit of a think about this. We've tried to pull it apart, etc. The answer is it would not be trivial, but it's not a roadblock. There is a potential way forward in that we could split the biogeochemistry land model into two bits and run things as two separate executables. One which looks something like the ACCESS-CM2 as it is now, but with a bit more, with some of the fast parts of the carbon cycle on one side, and then that would be loosely coupled through inputs, outputs, and restarts to a separate executor which would run the slow carbon cycle, so the annual time step carbon cycle. This could be viewed as a first step towards a more sort of natural coupling through a OOPSI. I'm going to leave that up there as a sort of a thing to provoke more conversation later on, but I'll just say that if we're going to go down a line of creating this new capability in ACCESS, we've got to put that in the context of the other work that needs to be done around the land in any of our other configurations. So depending on where you go, there will be a small amount or a medium amount or a large amount of work that's involved in the land. As far as I can tell, unless we reuse one of our existing models, we will have to do some work on the land to make that work. And I can go into that in more detail, but I'm being prompted. Okay.